So you're in a toxic and/or narcissistic relationship and you're staying for the children. Hi, my name is Michele Paradise, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel, where I bring together evidence-based information as well as my own personal experiences to help you navigate the most challenging relationships in your life, especially the one with yourself. So let's get started. So many of us, including myself, having been in a marriage with a narcissistic partner, and this is not about male or female. This can work both ways. I just want to make that clear. I don't want people to say I'm always bashing men, because I'm not, because it works both ways. This hopefully will land with everyone that's watching it that needs to hear this. But what I really want to talk about today is how we stay in a toxic relationship because we think it's good for the children. But I really want to bring to your attention and your awareness how we actually harm them so much more by staying in that relationship, and what we teach them through our actions and sometimes our words. When a parent decides to stay in a marriage or a relationship with a narcissistic partner for the children, there can be several unintended, and I know it's unintended, you don't want to harm your children, negative consequences on the children. So I'm going to go through these one by one, make it easier to understand and unpack them a bit. So let's get started. So the first thing a child is going to learn is unhealthy relationship dynamics, where they'll see dysfunction and normalize it. So maybe there will be arguing, there will be swearing, there will be hitting, there will be emotional abuse, physical abuse. The child, because they have very little else to compare it to, they will normalize that as a romantic, healthy relationship. And that's a fact. Because I remember back in my childhood, I did not really have a sleepover until I was about maybe 7 years old. And I remember very clearly I would watch my friend's parents sit on the sofa holding hands and occasionally kiss each other on the cheek or look lovingly in each other's eyes. Now, I'm not blaming my parents here. I always say that, and please know that to be true. But it was just so weird to me that these people were doing this because I had never seen that. So I had normalized the behavior of my first exposure to my first romantic relationship, which was that of my parents. So if it's a toxic or narcissistic relationship, there's going to be a lot of toxicity in it, and the child will learn about lack of respect for each other. They will come to believe that this is how relationships are meant to function, and they normalize that, and they build what I call a template. There's an imprint on the child. They create a template where they go out into the world and they replicate that because they don't know any differently until something changes. Maybe there's an intervention, or maybe they seek therapy, and this comes up in the work with their therapist. So that's a really big one. And that's what you're teaching your child, how to have a dysfunctional relationship. The next one is lack of boundaries. The narcissistic parent may have no boundaries. You might have heard the term enmeshment, where it's basically it's my way or the highway. So you have to follow all my rules. And the child will then not develop any boundaries of their own. And that will lead to problems in the future for that child. And or they might develop really rigid boundaries because there's so much fear that they don't know where the line is. So they just completely shut down and they become quite rigid and they don't let anybody in. So again, we're teaching our children about lack of boundaries or how not to set boundaries. And they're watching us if we're on the receiving end of that, which I was, and this is what my children were seeing, that, I don't care about myself. I put no boundaries in place to protect myself. Narcissistic neglect is a big one. So this is two-pronged. You'll have the narcissist that is absorbed with themselves and doesn't have the bandwidth, doesn't have the emotional capacity, the empathy to care about their children, to nurture their children. So the children aren't getting their needs met from the narcissistic parent. They're not being seen, they're not being heard, they're not being validated for who they are. On the other end of that is the non-narcissistic parent, what I call the target, and that parent is probably spending a lot of their time having to navigate the relationship between the narcissistic parent and the children, sometimes protect them physically, certainly emotionally. So they are absolutely overwhelmed and they do not have the ability to respond well to either of those situations, to the narcissist parent and to the children as well. And they very frequently and quickly burn out. And what happens is the children all they take away from that is the feeling of abandonment, neglect, rejection. They can't process any of this stuff. So they just feel like, first of all, my mother or my father is totally burned out, totally dissociated from me. And my father or my mother, narcissistic parent, doesn't care about me. They only care about themselves. So that's what they take away. And this one is a no-brainer. Low self-esteem. With all of that I've already said, they will have little to no self-esteem because they've modeled the behavior of the non-narcissistic parent, the target, as not caring about themselves, doing everything for the other parent to just keep the peace sometimes. So they're not going to value themselves, and they're not valued by, most of the time, they're not valued by either their parents because they're fighting their own battles emotionally and mentally. I've sort of touched on this one already in the last one, but I want to flesh it out a little bit more. People pleasing or codependency. To avoid conflict, a lot of children do this, and to gain approval from at least one of the parents, they will keep the peace. They will be sort of the good child. They will not rock the boat. Maybe in some families, and I've had experience of this, one child is sometimes modeling the behavior of the narcissistic parent and creates a lot of issues within the family, and all the oxygen in the family goes to them, and there's very little left over for the other child who's like the good child. Not that the other child is bad, it's just that they have adapted their personalities different to the woundedness and the trauma in the family. So they very frequently they become people pleasers, and they will go outside of self, abandon self, and make sure everybody else is happy and happy with them. And that's how they get their validation, because they're not getting it at home. And again, this is coupled with that, which is suppression of emotions. What's the point of saying how I feel? No one cares. And if I do say it, they might reject me. They might shut me down. They might cut me out of their lives. They might say, oh, you're too sensitive, or you're a crybaby. So what the child does is they suppress fairly unconsciously. They don't sit down and plan this and have a strategy, but unconsciously they are finding ways to survive. And one of the ways to survive is to not express myself. And that goes back to rigid boundaries as well. There's very rigid boundaries around their emotional life. And which we're not going to get into at the moment, but if we looked at attachment styles, this would probably tip into avoidant. They would avoid all kinds of emotional, vulnerable relationships in the future. Fear of conflict is a huge one. They've been witnessing or been involved in constant conflict, chaos. This can lead a child to develop an intense fear of confrontation and conflict. So what that means going forward is they won't stand up for themselves. They won't speak up for themselves. They won't ask for help sometimes. They will just stay very much on the down low, under the radar, because they don't want to repeat anything that they've witnessed in their childhood, because by now this will have become a really big activation, a really big trigger for the child, so they will avoid it at all costs. They can also have a real fear and mistrust of others, because a narcissistic parent can be manipulative, deceitful, untrustworthy, and that child may not know that for quite some time, because they might not see that side of a parent, especially if they have a covert narcissistic parent, that it's shrouded under other things like passive aggressiveness or poor me. I'm the victim all the time. If I had more money or different family, I would have had a better education. I would be more successful now. So the child may have developed a lot of, empathy for that parent, not realizing that they are a covert narcissist. And they will struggle when they realize that, and it will come out because the mask always slips. At some point it will slip. They will struggle to trust others, fearing the manipulation of behavior is lurking in the background. So again, this could lead into an avoidant attachment style going forward with their romantic relationships and even their platonic relationships, because they don't trust anybody. This is a big one. They're all big, but this one really can be so confusing for a child, which is inconsistent parenting models. So the child may observe the narcissistic parent as being bullying, angry, shouting, rageful. There may even be corporal punishment involved in the child's upbringing, whereas the other parent could be passive, docile, enabling the narcissistic parent to act the way they are. So what the child then, what happens to the child is they're then in this sort of cognitive dissonance where there's this sort of rageful, angry, highly activated parent. And then there's this more docile, passive, not asking for help, not speaking their mind parent. So when they're growing up, what a child is doing is getting all of their information or most of their information on how to be a parent from us, the parents. So this is incredibly inconsistent for the child. And when I work with people that have been raised in a narcissistic home, the word confusion usually comes up when we're connecting to the feelings that they felt during those times. So this doesn't easily go away or get resolved. And as I mentioned earlier, but I really want to, spotlight this one. Modeling narcissistic traits is a big one. I haven't seen any research to counter what I'm about to say. Narcissistic personality style and narcissistic personality disorder are not genetic. There hasn't been a gene found yet for it. So it is epigenetic. It is lifestyle modeling behaviors. So frequently you will find downline, you will find a narcissistic parent and a narcissistic child. Certainly my situation, it was father and brother because, and not always, but this does lean into that a child always models the same sex parent first before they actually sort of notice the other parent, gender, whatever. So it is not unusual for a male child to model a male father who is also a narcissist, and the same with the female child and a mother who's a narcissist. So they're getting a lot of their information and ways of behaving from that parent. And of course, that parent gets away with it. So it seems okay. And they're going to carry on doing it because no one's stopping them. And sometimes that parent will like that child even more. That child will become what is sometimes called a golden child, and the other child can be called a scapegoat child. I've done some other videos on this, so you'll see them on my channel if you're interested. And this is a really sad outcome of staying in the marriage or the relationship for the children is something called learned helplessness. They learn how to feel powerless in a household dominated by a narcissistic parent. First of all, they've not even understood how to develop a boundary because remember, it's my way or the highway, the narcissistic parent. So the enmeshment in the family, the child will not have even had the courage or the knowledge or understanding of how to develop a boundary. So they're going to go through life without boundaries. They're going to go through life thinking they can't do anything right or anything at all, that they don't have control over their circumstances or their fate because it's always been suppressed and dominated by the narcissistic parent. So that's a very serious one. And that, again, is very hard to undo. All of this can be undone, and this certainly can go on their healing journey. That is the good news. But I just want you to reflect on what you're doing by staying in the relationship for the good of your child, for the sake of your child. And finally, perfectionism and the fear of failure is a big one for children. They want to avoid criticism at all costs. They want to gain approval. It's terrifying. They're walking on eggshells living in this family, never knowing when the narcissistic, toxic parent is going to lose it and spew their venom all over them. So this child strives to be perfect, fearing any mistake or failure along the way. And this leads to chronic anxiety, stress, and unhealthy obsession with perfectionism. So in conclusion, now just to say before I conclude, I was married. I do have children. I did consider for quite some time and choose to stay for the sake of the children, not taking them away from their friends and schools and everything else. But then I realized what I was handing down to my children, and none of it was good because I was teaching them how to be helpless, how to be anxious, how to be a perfectionist, how to have low self-esteem, how to have no boundaries. And that is not what a parent is meant to do. So I know it's hard. I know it's hard. This was not easy for me, and it's not easy for people that I work with. But please, please consider not staying because of the children, because it is not healthy for the children. Because what children do is your words are not nearly as powerful as your actions. So you may say to the children, you may explain to the children that why you're staying or what their father or mother is doing, and don't be upset with them, and trying to navigate that. They can see through that because what children are really doing is watching you. And a lot of times your actions belie your words. So please, please, I beg of you to consider this at all costs. Get out of that relationship for the sake of the children. Do not stay. So thank you very much for staying and watching my video. I really appreciate it. Stay safe, keep well, stay awake, okay, in that relationship, and pay attention to what's going on around you. And please subscribe. It's always good to have new subscribers, and just click the button that we provided here.